Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Green Left Show. My name is Isaac Nellist, and today we're going to be talking to Peter Boyle, who's a long-time journalist with Green Left and also one of the leading members of the Socialist Alliance, about a range of topics, including how we respond to this rising kind of far-right mobilizations that we're seeing, what are some of the next steps for the Palestine Solidarity Movement, and how do we strengthen all the other movements for justice that we're campaigning for across the country. But before we begin, I'll just acknowledge that we're recording this on stolen land. This is land of the Gadigal people that was never ceded and always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Also mention, if you enjoy this interview today and you want to see more, head to greenleft.org.au and you can become a supporter from just $5 a month at greenleft.org.au/support. It's the best way to help us continue producing interviews like this and all the other work that we do as well. So good to talk to you, Peter. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Isaac.
So I guess to start off, we've seen these recent March for Australia rallies over the past few months. I guess I wanted to hear your assessment of these marches. What do they kind of represent, and where did they kind of spring from? I guess especially in comparison with the kind of far-right upsurge that we've seen internationally, and in particular in the United States and in Britain.
Well, the peculiar thing, I think, or the specific character of March for Australia, which I want to start with, was that it was announced pretty much as a reaction to one of the most successful demonstrations of solidarity we have seen in this country for decades. And that was the mass march of hundreds of thousands of people against the genocide in Gaza across the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And March for Australia came as a reaction to that. The organisers of the march sought to capitalise or to try and exploit what they thought might be a popular reaction against all these people marching across the Harbour Bridge, our Harbour Bridge, in solidarity with Palestinians. Brown-skinned people in another country being attacked by another colonial settler state, Israel. So I think that was very much the immediate setting. And of course, there was an interest of the Zionists and the pro-Zionist forces, the pro-Israel forces in Australia, to give it a bit of encouragement, and they did. And I think this is not a new story. They've been trying to do this for 2 years. They've been trying to push back against this solidarity, and the solidarity was significant in a much broader way than just simply a contribution to the global struggle for justice and for peace in Palestine. It was, if you like, a spearhead into the consciousness of the great masses of Australian people, Australian working people, who have come through a period of time where we've been basically told to ignore human solidarity and everybody just go for themselves. So in this sense, it continues, there's a connection with the rise of the far right in other parts of the world, most particularly in Western Europe and in North America, in the United States in particular. It's a political phenomena that is, in one sense, grounded on the decades of neoliberal capitalism that has been imposed by ruling parties. Actually, ruling parties of all colours, in the sense of the more what's seen as the more left-wing, Labour, right, social democratic, or in the United States, Democrat ruling parties, or the more traditionally conservative ruling parties. They both come in, one after another, taken turns, played tag team in imposing a lot of pain on ordinary working people, rolling back many of the gains in terms of social rights, civil rights, and working conditions and wages of ordinary people. So there has been these decades of pain inflicted on people, and in part, the rise the ground for the rise of a populist right all around the world is laid by this. People are unhappy. A lot of people are unhappy, frustrated, and they're looking for answers, but they're also looking for someone to blame for it. And this is where the far right, the populist right, comes in with a scapegoat. It's immigration. It's those foreigners who've come in. And of course this dovetails very neatly with the racism that has been built and actually sold as a poison to divide the working class in all these countries, all the rich imperialist countries around the world. We've been suffering from this problem more than 100 years, for more than 100 years. You know, it's a device to not only divide the working class, but to get them on side with the ruling class of those countries, particularly when they go to war against other countries. And so this is a flip side of it. If we only see the economic aspect of the rise of the far right in all these countries, we'll be missing something else. Because one of the consequences of the decades of neoliberalism is that it has changed the shape of the world economy. Big capitalist companies have shifted a lot of their production, what they thought was, the manufacturing jobs, the jobs that required a lot of labour, they've shifted them to China and other countries in the global south. This is over the same period. And they did it to lower their costs and to increase their profits. Self-serving actions. They didn't do it to develop China. But as a consequence of this, the Chinese and other East Asian economies in particular have grown over the last period. And this creates an economic basis for greater state power, including military power. But let's put this in context. The United States and its allies, including Australia, are still overwhelmingly the dominant military power in the world. They have bases everywhere. You know, we run aggressive naval, exercises, sail truce, just off the coast of China. You know, so let's put this in perspective. But they do want, and they are trying to get popular support for this. So we have these two factors coming together. On one hand, we have the problem from the point of view, looking from the point of view of the ruling class, the problem of how to deal with people's pain, frustration after you have actually squeezed them in your own countries, the working class, you've squeezed them so much. How do we deal with their frustration, their disillusionment in the traditional parties of government? Okay, give them a scapegoat. Give them right-wing populism. So that's part of their solution. How do we get people to support us in imposing even more pain by spending billions, if not trillions on a global scale of public funds that could go into solving social issues like housing, addressing the climate emergency, all these things? If you're going to shift them, and you want to shift them into bolstering, building up, making sure that your US-led war machine remains dominant in the world, how do you sell that? Well, of course, it's handy, isn't it? If you can stoke racism and hate against those brown people over there. So this is the context. That being said, I would say in Australia we have not seen the kind of mass support for that sort of right-wing populist politics in the past. But perhaps the people who were leading the March for Australia saw an opportunity here. And they tried it out, they're testing it. And of course we can't be certain that they won't be successful in the future. But what we have seen so far is they've made some big mistakes. And the first big mistake, I would say, in their first mobilization was to let these black-clad neo-Nazis from the National Socialist Network, as they call it, NSN, go to the front of the rallies. I mean, that was like stupid optics. It made them look pretty scary to lots of people who might otherwise have been attracted by their message of blame immigration, right? So I think we have seen the numbers have declined since then. Whether they can recover from that by hiding the ugly face of this racist movement or not is yet to be seen.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously the immigration thing has been their big kind of argument that you can blame anything on immigration, whether it's, there's not enough homes, there's not enough healthcare because of all the immigrants coming, is basically the repeated line that you hear over and over again from the kind of right-wing trolls online, but also put in mainstream media by these kind of forces. So where do you think this kind of narrative is coming from, and how in particular are the major parties responsible for both encouraging this narrative and then exploiting it for their own gain as well?
Well, the first thing that has to be said is that there is a copycat element to the March for Australia movement here. They look at, and they're inspired, and they are heartened by what's happened under Trump, and they're heartened by these ugly scenes. For most people, the ugly scenes of racist rioting against refugees and immigrants that we see in Britain, right? They're trying to copycat, so they just go for those slogans, and it fits in with the general scapegoating thing. But I think if you look at it another way, the argument that they put forward, we're against mass immigration, is actually them trying to reorganise after making a big mistake in their first rally. So they're saying, no, we're not racist. They want to say, we're not racist, we're not fascists, we're not pro-neo-Nazis, we're just against mass immigration. Well, actually, it's a very shallow sort of excuse, really, because when you look at the video, you look at all the imagery that you see of their subsequent marches, you see the screaming deport, deport, deport. The term which the far right has tried to popularise, remigration, I think. It's there. It's just coming out, and so it's not about mass immigration, because actually there is no problem of mass immigration in Australia. There's no mass immigration in Australia. The immigration intake, the net immigration intake in Australia, went up after basically Australia was locked up and closed down to people from outside during the period of the COVID pandemic. So in 2024, there was the sort of bounce back. All the pent-up immigration came up again. So there was a rise. Actually, the statistics in the last year shows a decline. From the point of view of one section of the ruling class, they're worried about it. They're worried that the decline is so steep that they are going to be facing labour shortages in critical areas in the next period. And there's one section of the capitalist class that is arguing that. So that's where that comes from. Now, of course, the ground for scapegoating migrants for the social ills, for the problems that people face, has been not only caused by the neoliberal measures, but the governments that have implemented these neoliberal measures have quite cynically tried to manipulate the public reactions to this. So even in a country like Australia, they have been carrying out practical anti-refugee policies that are actually some of the worst in the world, in the Western world. And in fact, many of the things that Donald Trump has started to do in his second term, have been done in Australia in terms of restrictions, attacks on refugees, etc. In Britain, the far right, is calling for measures that are already implemented in Australia by Labor governments, in some cases introduced by Labor governments, against refugees in their country. So, in that sense, you have the very political parties that have created the basis for this right-wing populism, also directly carrying out policies that encourage people to racialise problems. And they do it with law and order. That's a classic case, you know. There's at tremendous costs for particularly some of the most oppressed sections of society. The First Nations people have been the primary victims of a law and order campaign that is also part of this blame game, highly, not explicitly, but in practice, racially angled blame game for the pain that people feel in society. And the consequence of this is massive, disproportionate imprisonment of First Nations people in Australia, a shameful statistic, and one that flows on to deaths in custody, statistics rising, etc.
Yeah, so I just had a couple of follow-on kind of questions from that. So I guess when you look at these kind of far-right movements in Europe and in the United States, there's a slight difference where, you know, Trump is he's a kind of a one-off kind of figure who's kind of taken over the Republican Party, which obviously was already racist and, you know, had all these issues already brewing, but he's kind of become the figurehead for that. Whereas in Europe, it's kind of been like these far-right, smaller parties that have kind of risen up and taken power. Like in Britain, there's the Reform, who are kind of basically taking all the votes from the Conservatives and heading in a more kind of far-right direction, particularly based on the anti-immigration stuff. In Australia, it's kind of like we don't really have this. There's Pauline Hanson's One Nation. There's a bunch of other smaller far-right parties, but none of them have really taken that position as like the alternative kind of for the people who are buying into this narrative. It's been more led through the kind of Liberal Party mainstream and the other and the national, well, I guess the coalition in general. So I just wanted your comments on, you know, where has the far right got any actual political power in this country, and how is it using it?
Well, I think Australia is different in different ways to both the situation you're seeing emerging in Western Europe, where you see new far right parties who are not traditional parties of government starting to threaten in the polls the traditional parties of government. In the US, the populist right, goes into one of those traditional parties, takes it over, remakes it more in its own image. Now, what's happening in Australia? I mean, Pauline Hanson. I think there's this rise of the new rights full of hopefuls. Pauline Hanson being one of them. I mean, she probably thinks, this is her chance. And that there are some predictions that the One Nation vote's going to go up in future elections, but it's still at the margins, right? On the other hand, there is within the Liberal Party and within the National Party and the coalition parties as a whole, there has been a kind of reconsolidation of the far right within. And some sections of the far right have chosen the tactic, sometimes successful to some degree or sometimes not so successful, of going into the Liberal Party or going into the National Party and creating right-wing factions. And ironically, this has contributed currently to a crisis in both the coalition parties. Their right wing is causing them headaches. It's putting pressure within them to adopt policy positions like rejecting net zero, carbon net zero policies, and things that were actually quite safe from the point of view of the ruling class. They're threatening that consensus that was there between the major parties. So it's not really clear whether the far right here really are just like hoping that they have a chance. That movement hasn't found a way in to get mass political representation. But that's not to say it couldn't happen, right? It could happen, and that's why it comes down to this question of how best to stop that. What are the things that we should be aiming to do to prevent that from happening? Because right now, they don't have that situation. We do not have a One Nation or libertarians in a position where they are, getting the kind of votes that, say, you see in France that Le Pen has managed to pull together. Nothing like that, nowhere. They're still in the margins there, and they're quite divided, and all these aspirational would-be Führers, all hoping that they'll be the one, and all that's to our advantage, right? But on the other hand, let's look at it another way, right? Because I think in politics, you don't want to just look at the formal institutions, the political parties. We've got to look at it in terms of the classes and their interests and what they're doing. Now, the other day, it has been leaked that Australia's richest person, Gina Rinehart, took Pauline Hanson to Donald Trump's Halloween party. I mean, it's so funny, isn't it? Like two real-life monsters having a party about monsters. So funny. But, that says two things, right? There's this sort of like total chancer, like Pauline Hanson is sort of like aging and probably lost her run. She's finished trying to get her daughter into politics, looking at successes, etc. That's a bit strange. But there is Gina Rinehart. Now, of course, Gina Rinehart is, she's a Trump supporter. She's totally right-wing. Her father had a fascistic mindset, wanted to use nuclear weapons to eliminate the Aboriginal problem at one stage in Western Australia. I mean, these are the people we're talking about. Pretty horrible. But abstracted away from the personalities of these rich people and look at the interests of the capitalist class. If they're looking at the problem, how do we politically manage this period where many people are feeling uncertain, frustrated, their dreams are being smashed, their dreams of owning a house, so central to the dreams of many working class people in Australia, being smashed before their very eyes, job insecurity, more and more people in the precariat, living, doing shit jobs for shit pay and with no security whatsoever. How do you manage this politically? And so from their point of view, they're looking around. I think in Australia they haven't quite decided, all of them, and they're probably arguing among themselves. So they put a bit of money here, and a bit of money is quite a lot, These are very, very rich people. And they have been funding these right-wing movements in multiple ways. They have special organisations to carry out this funding. It's like Advance, I think. Advance Australia, it's one of the funding bodies. And, they're everywhere. They're putting money in, one of the main people running it is the husband of Gillian Segal, who's the government's special envoy on anti-Semitism. So they have some positions of power, and they're playing various games here, feeling it out, seeing what they have to do. But I would say, generally in Australia, neither of those two options is, even anywhere close. That is neither the option of a far-right populist movement completely taking over, say either the coalition as a whole or the Labor Party, nor do we have a third party that has yet to emerge with the kind of populist support we've seen, say, in France and AFD in Germany or Netherlands. A lot of countries, quite disturbing, right? And Britain too. It is looking quite bad. Yes, but all this gives them hope, doesn't it? They're all hoping that the whole range of them, from the neo-Nazis to Pauline Hanson, they're all thinking, wow, can we have some of that?
Well, you raised a good point just before, is we have this advantage that they're a little bit disorganized at this stage, and how do we stop it from getting to the point that it's in Europe or the US or other parts of the world? So I guess as a jumping off point, there have been counter protests organised against these March for Australia by the left, to greater or lesser success in different cities, and there's been some kind of confrontation, different tactics and things like that that have been tried. So I guess, what are your comments on those counter protests, and how do we actually create a stronger counter response to these racist mobilizations generally?
Well, I want to introduce one more general thought first, because I think it's part of understanding what the problem is, because what we do to solve the problem, actually flows from understanding the problem for what it is. The character of the rise of right-wing popularism all around the world, but primarily in the Western imperialist countries, right, today is very different, is very, very different to the situation of the rise of fascism in the 1930s in Europe. In one respect, first of all, when fascism rose up and, created, Mussolini and created Hitler regimes, there was a completely different class balance of forces. The working class was highly organized. It was still, in the wake of the successful Russian Revolution, there were mass organizations of the working class. They were quite strong. And that provided the context for the choice of sections of the capitalist class to say, we're prepared to give it to a new emerging fascist party, like Hitler's Nazis, because you can come out there and you have the forces and you have the degree of popular support to go and smash this powerful working class movement. That's not the situation today. The situation today in all around the world, actually, but particularly in these Western imperialist countries, is the working class has never been as defeated and as weak as it is today for many, many decades. And this is largely as a result of the neoliberal offensive. They've basically, unionization rates have gone right down. Workers have been made to compete with each other instead of working in solidarity to fight for their rights. So that's not the problem. So the function of right-wing populism today is different. It is actually more ideological. They don't need brown shirts to go and smash down powerful workers' organizations. That's not the problem. That's not what they're doing. So let's understand, this is to go and get people divided, confused, to put them on a racist framework and to support the ruling class in the end, the capitalist class, in its rebuilding of its imperial military power overseas. If that involves carrying out a genocide, as we see in Gaza and Palestine, or whether it's an intervention to another country, a war against China, whatever. They want to use this to get people on their side. So this is the problem, right? So our problem now is our reaction to this has to be shaped by that. And I think it's fundamentally a political struggle. The challenge for the movement today is to build solidarity and encourage the values and the practical solidarity between peoples, all the sections of the working class in this country, including the recent migrants, people of different diverse religious and ethnic backgrounds, but also international solidarity with the Palestinians, with all the oppressed people around the world. So that should be our political objective. We also can see that they are the right-wing populists are politically still isolated. They haven't got these big rising, electoral parties yet. So we want to keep them isolated. So I think all our tactics have to flow from this understanding of what the threat is. So the game here is, how do we take advantage of all the divisions they have within, all their vulnerabilities, all the lies they put forward, to split, divide, and isolate them politically. So I think our political actions have to flow from this. They also have to address the real drivers of the pain that is being exploited by the right-wing populists. So we have to have a movement that doesn't just say whole counter-protests. I think we do need to have counter-protests to the right-wing March for Australia actions. But we also have to have movements that fight for First Nations rights. We have to keep that going. We've got to keep going the pressure to defend the rights of refugees and to fight the policies that have actually built up this kind of anti-refugee, heartless, attitudes that both Labor and the Coalition have encouraged. We have to continue all these fights. And of course, in the specific context now, where we have this huge advantage of a 2-year-old mass solidarity movement for the people of Palestine against the genocide that Israel is carrying out, continues to carry out today, we have to keep building that. So I think this is the kind of like, it's not like one solution fix everything, but one solution that is definitely not the real solution is the idea that our fundamental challenge is to either physically smash, the small groups of neo-Nazis who went to the front, now they've gone into Mufti and they're in hiding in the ranks of March for Australia. It's still there. The character of this movement is racist. Let's not make no bones about it, right? It's racist, but that can be exploited against us. And I think we saw March for Australia trying to do it to some degree in their third mobilisation. They tried to put themselves as the victims, So we've got to be careful not to get trapped by that. But I think mainly, our strength is in the success that we've had. A success in building the solidarity around against the genocide that brought those hundreds of thousands of people across the Sydney Harbour Bridge. That's a huge success. And it was a success won under very difficult conditions because, we had a trade union movement that was largely absent for 2 years, absent on an amazing global, moral issue of the day. Why? Fundamentally because they want to protect the Labor government. They're completely controlled, hegemonised by the Labor Party and the Labor government in power. Secondly, because they're so much weaker. They only represent about 12, 13%. They only organise 12 or 13% of the population. So in many ways, you could say the solidarity movement has been more successful in reaching out and winning over the hearts and minds of large sections of the working class than any trade union movement has been able to for a long time. Because they've gone along with the agenda of the capitalist neoliberal agenda to their detriment, paid a price for it, right? So I think that's the situation we're in, build on our strengths. It is very uncertain what exactly will happen around Gaza right now, because there is this unstable ceasefire that supposedly Donald Trump, brought into place, which seems to be, it's not a simple thing. It's by and large, it's an endorsement of, it comes on the back, of US support for 2 years of most horrendous genocidal policies in Gaza, right? So it comes on the back of the US continuing to arm Israel and all its allies, including Australia, doing the same, still enabling Israel to resume the full-paced genocide anytime it wants to on the slightest excuse, still allowing and arming Israel to be able to bomb and attack its neighbours anytime it wants to, without any legal cover even. All these things are going. So it's a kind of an uneasy truce. We do have to reflect, though, that why is there even an uneasy ceasefire truce right now? And I think it reflects one of the strengths of our movement, of our side of policy. We may not have succeeded in the global solidarity movement of stopping the United States and its allies, including Australia, from arming and supporting effectively Israel's genocide. We haven't after 2 years of struggle, but we have made it quite difficult politically for this alliance to continue. Israel has never been as delegitimized on a global scale ever before. And Donald Trump is many things, and some people say he's totally random, but he's not totally unsavvy. I think he can read the room. So he seems to be reading the room enough to say, well, we don't want to risk a further delegitimization, not just of Israel, but of the whole imperial dominance of the world. So maybe it's a reflection, if you like, of a partial win. Of course, not good enough for us, right? We really need to have this broken, you know. We really need to have that big win that the movement against the war in Vietnam had, where it actually stopped the troops from, forced the US and its allies, including Australia, to pull its troops out of the war. That would be a great win. That would be a decisive win. Haven't got there yet, so we still want to build a movement. It will be a bit difficult right now because the ceasefire is in play, and ultimately people are trying to survive. In particular, the Palestinian people have been through this horrendous thing. They have got to figure out, where do we go here? So there is a degree of, there is a shift. It may not be so easy for us to get hundreds of thousands to march across the harbour bridge today, right now. But things might change, and we have to be prepared. Israel still can resume, full-paced genocide in Gaza at any time. It can start another war with another country any time. And we have 2 years of gains behind us, 2 years of powerful movement building. We want to continue to build on that.